No one who lived near Whispering Pines Wildlife Sanctuary ever forgot the night Shadow first limped through the underbrush, the moonlight silvering his fur, his yellow eyes haunting the dark like two small lanterns. For years, rangers whispered stories about him, each version more dramatic than the last. A ghost, a spirit, a warning from nature itself. But Shadow was simply a wolf, old and gray, his left hind leg stiff with a permanent limp, and his heart weighed down with memories. Shadow had not always been alone. Once, he was the leader of a small pack that roamed the northern edge of the sanctuary, where the woods grew thick and the ground was soft underfoot. He had a mate, wild and beautiful, and 3 pups who tumbled and yipped around him every morning as the sun filtered through the pines. Those days were as golden as autumn leaves, full of warmth, promise, and the simple rhythm of the wild. But the forest did not protect its own from the cruelty of humans. One rainy dawn, when the trees still dripped with last night's storm, gunshots shattered the morning silence. Shadow lost everything that day. His family, his future, and a part of himself that never healed. Years slipped past. The pack's territory shrank as more land fell to fences and roads. Shadow wandered the edges of Whispering Pines, rarely venturing deep into the heart of the sanctuary where other wolves sometimes still called. He avoided them, as he avoided everything: people, open meadows, the possibility of hope. Other animals sensed his pain and his restraint. Shadow did not hunt inside the sanctuary, never harassed the deer or chased the young colts that grazed in the clearing. Even the rangers, hardened by years of wrangling with wild animals, gave him a certain respect. They watched him from afar, sometimes catching a glimpse on a hidden camera, gray, limping, always silent. Every season brought new challenges. Harsh winters bit through Shadow's thinning coat. Summers brought the threat of fire and thirst. But he survived, always just out of reach, a shadow among shadows. Sometimes, on especially cold nights, he would curl beneath the twisted roots of an old pine, close his eyes, and remember the warmth of his mate pressed against him, the tiny paws of his pups kneading his side. Then the memories faded, swallowed by the ache of loneliness. Shadow's days followed a pattern. Wake at first light, sniff the wind for danger, patrol the edges of the sanctuary, avoid the roads and the cameras. He'd pause at the narrow stream that sliced through the northern boundary, lapping the cold water in slow, careful gulps. Now and then he'd catch the scent of foxes, or the sharp musk of raccoons, but he never bothered them. Hunger had sharpened him, but not twisted him. He hunted only what he needed, mostly rabbits, sometimes a sick or injured squirrel. The other creatures came to know his footsteps. They learned that Shadow, for all his wolfish power, was no longer a threat. There were moments, though, when something fierce flared up in him, a memory, a scent, a stirring of the old instincts. When the wind shifted and carried with it the distant calls of coyotes, or the chatter of magpies warning of strangers, Shadow would lift his head and listen, ears twitching, heart pounding. For a brief heartbeat, he felt young again, the alpha wolf, protector of his own. But as quickly as it came, the feeling passed, and he returned to his lonely wandering. The rangers called him the Lone Wolf, but among themselves they used his true name, Shadow. It suited him, the way he slipped through the trees, the way he seemed half a ghost, the way his past clung to him like mist. They left him alone, mostly. There was an unspoken agreement between Shadow and the humans who watched over Whispering Pines. As long as he kept to himself, as long as he followed the unspoken rules of the sanctuary, he was allowed to roam in peace. But not everyone agreed. Some of the newer rangers, eager to prove themselves, argued that a lone wolf, especially one as old and injured as Shadow, should be trapped and relocated, maybe even euthanized. "He's a liability," one said, gesturing toward a grainy photo of Shadow prowling near the visitor's center at dusk. But the older rangers shook their heads. "Leave him be," they said. "He's earned it." The debates flared up now and then, but always died down, drowned out by more pressing problems: escaped horses, broken fences, the slow encroachment of poachers. Shadow, for his part, paid no mind to the human drama. He moved through the world with a slow, deliberate grace, always alert, always wary. There was a wisdom in his gaze, a quiet acceptance of pain and loss. He had seen enough of both to know that the world was neither kind nor cruel, but simply indifferent. Sometimes, on moonlit nights, Shadow would stand at the edge of the sanctuary's biggest meadow and stare out across the open grass. He'd watch the wild horses grazing, their coats glistening under the stars, their movements confident and unafraid. Once, a young colt with a white blaze dared to approach him, sniffing curiously at the old wolf's side. Shadow stood perfectly still, allowing the colt to touch his nose to Shadow's flank before trotting back to its herd. The moment lingered in his memory, a reminder that even in loneliness, connection was possible, however fleeting. On especially quiet nights, when the wind rustled through the pines and the world felt suspended between sleep and waking, Shadow would lift his muzzle and howl. The sound was low, mournful, a song of everything he'd lost and everything he still hoped to find. The howl carried through the sanctuary, echoing off the rocks and trees, settling in the hearts of every creature who heard it. Unknown to Shadow, his presence was not only noted by the animals. At the sanctuary's headquarters, a small building tucked behind the main gate, rangers monitored hidden cameras 24 hours a day. They watched his movements, logged his routines, debated his fate. One volunteer, a young woman named Sierra, became especially fascinated. She tracked his wanderings in a battered notebook, sketching his silhouette again and again, searching for meaning in the patterns of his loneliness. As autumn settled over whispering pines, painting the world gold and red, Shadow moved slower, his limp more pronounced. Age weighed on him, as did the coming cold. Yet in his eyes, there was still a spark, the stubborn hope that, despite everything, life had more to offer. He had survived loss, grief, the indifference of the wild. What he could not have guessed was that his story was about to change. In the sanctuary's outer fields, under a sky rumbling with the promise of rain, a new life was about to enter the world. And with it, the beginnings of a bond that would echo through whispering pines for years to come. The storm came suddenly, sweeping across whispering pines with a vengeance, turning the sanctuary's peaceful fields into a landscape of wind and water. Lightning cracked above the treetops, illuminating the pounding rain that thrashed the outer pastures, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and electricity. Deep in the shadow of a wind-battered oak, a pregnant mare struggled against the night, her flanks heaving, her body trembling as she searched desperately for shelter. Every instinct urged her to run, to find cover, but she could go no further. She collapsed, her breath ragged, eyes wide with fear and pain. The sanctuary's perimeter was rarely this wild. Most of the herd kept to the protected inner meadows, but this mare had been driven to the outskirts by the push and shove of stronger, more dominant horses. Alone, vulnerable, she braced herself against the pain that racked her body. Waves of agony that came harder, faster. All around her the storm raged, branches snapped overhead, rain hammered the grass, and for a moment even the wolves and foxes hunkered low, waiting for the fury to pass. No one witnessed the foal's first breath but the wind. With one last exhausted effort, the mare gave birth. A tiny colt, slick with afterbirth, legs folded awkwardly beneath him. His coat was a soft brown, already marked by a white blaze running from his forehead down to his pink nose, a streak of innocence in a harsh world. The colt struggled, shivering violently in the cold, his mother's body shielding him as best she could from the driving rain. The effort left her spent. Her breath rattled in her chest. She nuzzled the colt once, her muzzle trembling, then lay still, eyes glazed and unseeing as the storm claimed her. For long minutes, the foal, Spirit, knew only confusion. He tried to rise, legs too new and fragile to hold his weight. Each time he fell, the wet grass and cold mud sapped a little more of his strength. He called for his mother, a thin, desperate whinny lost to the thunder. Around him, the world seemed impossibly vast and empty. The storm, indifferent to life and loss, rolled on. Across the sanctuary, most of the rangers sheltered inside the main outpost, sipping hot coffee and watching the storm through rain-fogged windows. Only Sierra stayed glued to the banks of monitors in the security office, eyes scanning the flickering feeds from dozens of hidden cameras. She was the youngest volunteer, eager and bright, with a stubborn belief that every life in Whispering Pines mattered. It was her who spotted the flash of movement, a faint heat signature in the grass at the edge of Camera 9's range. She leaned closer, brushing her hair from her face, and adjusted the focus. The screen resolved into a blurred shape. Two shapes, actually. The larger one lay still. The smaller struggled, legs splayed, every movement a fight against the mud. Sierra's heart caught in her throat. She radioed her supervisor, voice tight. "There's a foal on the south boundary. No sign of the herd. I think the mare's down." Static crackled in reply. "Copy that, Sierra. Protocol is hands off unless there's immediate threat. The storm should pass soon. Let's wait and see." Sierra bit back a retort. She hated the policy, but she understood it. Intervening too soon could do more harm than good. Sometimes, nature had to be allowed to take its course. The night dragged on, each hour colder and harder for the tiny colt. At some point, as the worst of the thunder faded, something else stirred at the forest's edge. Shadow, drawn by the scent of blood and fear, watched from beneath the branches. Wolves were supposed to be the terror of such scenes, nature's cold calculus embodied in fang and hunger. But Shadow felt only a tug of memory, something sharp and ancient that made him hesitate. He crept closer, his limp slowing him, every muscle tensed for trouble. The foal sensed him, eyes rolling, body frozen with instinctive terror. Shadow stopped, rain coursing down his battered coat. He sniffed the air, recognizing not just the scent of new life, but also the unmistakable stench of loss. For a long moment, the wolf and the foal regarded each other across the space that separated predator from prey, death from hope. But Shadow did not attack. Instead, he circled once, lowered his head, and nudged the limp form of the mare. When she did not stir, he turned his attention to the colt. His nose brushed the colt's side, gently, almost with reverence. Spirit flinched but did not run. He was too weak for flight. Inside the security office, Sierra watched, transfixed. She had never seen anything like it. A wolf, infamous even among the rangers, moving with such tenderness. Her supervisor, roused by her insistence, squinted at the screen, shaking his head. "Let's monitor for now. If he tries anything, we move. Otherwise, let's see what nature decides." Sierra didn't answer, but she kept watching, documenting every detail. Shadow lay beside Spirit, his body blocking some of the wind, offering what warmth he could. Occasionally, he nudged the foal upright, encouraging him to try again to stand. The colt's efforts were feeble at first, but the wolf's presence seemed to ignite a spark of will in him. Bit by bit, the trembling colt managed to plant his hooves, swaying, then collapsing again, but always trying. Shadow remained, a silent guardian through the blackest hours before dawn. By morning, the storm had blown itself out, leaving the sanctuary drenched in quiet. A layer of mist rose from the grass. The foal, pressed against Shadow's side, slept at last, spent but alive. Overhead, the first weak rays of sunlight broke through the clouds. From her post, Sierra let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She scribbled furious notes in her journal, unable to look away from the unlikely pair on the screen. Elsewhere in the sanctuary, life went on as always. The wild horses returned to graze, deer picked their way through the underbrush, and the other wolves, hidden deep in the forest, carried on with their own stories of survival and loss. But for those who watched, it was clear that something extraordinary had taken root at the edge of Whispering Pines. A fragile, unexpected bond, forged in the heart of a storm, between a lonely wolf and an orphaned colt. Unbeknownst to the staff, this stormy night would become legend, spoken of in awe and curiosity by those who understood the wild and those who simply wished they did. For Shadow and Spirit, it was only the beginning. Their destinies were now entwined, shaped by rain, courage, and a world that sometimes, just sometimes, allowed the impossible to happen. The rain had washed away the worst of the night's violence, but a sharp chill still clung to the air as dawn crept over Whispering Pines. The wet grass sparkled with beads of light, but the world felt quiet, almost reverent, as if every creature sensed something sacred had unfolded in the dark. Under the broad, sheltering limbs of the old oak, the newborn colt, Spirit, slept curled tightly against Shadow, the aging wolf whose unexpected presence had changed the course of 2 lives. When Spirit finally stirred, blinking into the gray morning, the first thing he saw was Shadow's weathered muzzle resting on his side. The wolf's eyes were open, calm but alert, as if keeping watch not just over the vulnerable foal, but the entire waking world. Spirit, instinctively fearful at first, found himself studying the wolf's slow, careful breaths. No threat came, only warmth, steady and reassuring, a lifeline in the vast uncertainty he'd been born into. In the sanctuary's security office, Sierra hadn't slept. Coffee gone cold beside her, she continued her vigil over the glowing monitor. She sketched every movement, every interaction, filling her notebook with questions and theories. When her supervisor entered, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, he paused at the doorway, drawn by the silent drama playing out on screen. "He's still there," the man muttered, disbelief in his tone. Sierra nodded, her gaze fixed. "He stayed with the foal all night. He's protecting him." The policy was clear: minimal interference unless an animal's life was in immediate danger, but nothing in the rulebook covered a wolf adopting an orphaned colt. Sierra argued for patience. "Let's see what happens. This is rare, maybe even historic." Her supervisor, cautious but curious, relented. "Fine, but we stay ready. Nature can be brutal, even if it looks gentle for a moment." As the sun rose higher, Shadow nudged Spirit upright with his nose, encouraging him to stand. Spirit's legs wobbled beneath him, the effort making him grunt softly, but Shadow's persistence paid off. Each time Spirit stumbled and fell, Shadow waited, then pressed him to try again. The foal's instinct warred with exhaustion, but something about the wolf's unwavering presence kindled determination in him. Eventually, Spirit managed a few shaky steps. He mimicked Shadow's movements, lowering his head to the grass, sniffing curiously at wildflowers battered by the storm. Shadow led him a short distance to a shallow puddle where rainwater had collected. He pawed at the edge and lapped at the water, glancing back. After a moment's hesitation, Spirit copied him, sipping awkwardly. The simple act felt monumental. A moment of learning, of survival, of trust. All morning, Shadow guarded Spirit's side. When a pair of curious magpies swooped low to investigate, the wolf growled softly, hackles bristling until they retreated to a nearby fence post. When the wind shifted and carried the distant calls of other wolves, Shadow stood between the foal and the trees, ears pricked, body tense. Something in him, a memory of fatherhood, perhaps, or a need to atone for loss, kept him fiercely protective. Unseen by the two, life in the sanctuary stirred. The herd of wild horses grazed warily nearby, watching from a distance, uncertain what to make of the sight. 1 or 2 older mares snorted, tossing their heads as if to warn the other horses away. Some animals, like the fox that slipped through the underbrush or the deer grazing under the pines, gave Shadow a wide berth, sensing the weight of his presence. By midday, the clouds thinned, and shafts of sunlight dappled the clearing. Spirit, no longer shivering, found more strength in his legs. He followed Shadow everywhere, bumping clumsily into the wolf's side, mimicking even his pauses and head tilts. Where Shadow sniffed the ground, Spirit lowered his nose as well, curious about every scent. The wolf, who had spent years alone, seemed to accept this new Shadow without complaint, his gaze softening every time the colt pressed near. In the security office, the debate intensified. Some sanctuary staff argued this could not continue. Nature, they insisted, would correct itself. Others, led by Sierra, believed they were witnessing something profound. "He's teaching the colt how to survive," Sierra explained to a skeptical board member during a video call. "It's not just instinct. There's intent." The board member, an older woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, pursed her lips. "Intent or not, that's a wolf and a horse. We can't risk the colt's life." Sierra countered, "If we intervene now, Spirit might not survive either. He's already bonded to the wolf." The standoff ended in compromise. More observation, more notes, but no rescue attempt. Not yet. Out in the field, as dusk approached, Shadow began leading Spirit toward the cover of denser trees. The journey was slow. Spirit stumbled often, sides heaving from the effort. But Shadow waited patiently, always returning to nudge him along. When the night grew colder, Shadow curled around the foal again, shielding him from the chill. Overhead, the sky cleared at last, and stars glittered above the sanctuary. Sierra watched as Spirit, comforted by the wolf's steady heartbeat, drifted into sleep. Unbeknownst to the staff, the other wolves had begun to notice as well. One night, Shadow's old rival, a younger black wolf, appeared at the edge of the clearing. Eyes gleaming in the starlight, the intruder crept closer, drawn by the scent of horse and something unfamiliar. Shadow stood, silent but formidable, placing himself between Spirit and the other wolf. A low growl rumbled in his chest. The black wolf hesitated, studied the strange pair, then faded back into the darkness. The message was clear. Spirit was under Shadow's protection. Days passed in this new rhythm. Shadow showed Spirit where to drink, where to find shelter from rain, how to listen for danger. The foal grew stronger with each sunrise, his trust in Shadow deepening. Sometimes, when the wind was just right, Spirit would raise his head and try to imitate the wolf's mournful howl. The sound was awkward, a foal's whinny mixed with an uncertain yelp, but it made Shadow pause and tilt his head, as if remembering the lost pups he'd once taught the same song. By now, Sierra's journal was overflowing. She documented every interaction, every lesson learned, and every moment of tension. She even wrote a letter to a professor at a nearby university, asking for advice. "What are we witnessing here?" she wrote. "Is this even possible?" The answer came days later. Sometimes, grief finds its own companions. Nature surprises us. Sierra smiled, feeling she was part of something bigger than herself. Night after night, Shadow remained Spirit's silent guardian. He kept danger at bay, gave warmth, and provided the first stability Spirit had ever known. And in those quiet hours, with the world holding its breath, a wolf and a colt found a kind of family, stitched together by loss and hope in the silent language of the wild. For the first time since his earliest days, Shadow did not wake alone. With every new dawn, Spirit was there, blinking in the pale light, his long legs tucked under him, dark eyes alert and watchful. The strange partnership between wolf and foal grew stronger with each sunrise, drawing curious glances not just from the wild horses grazing nearby, but also from the hidden cameras scattered across the sanctuary's southern edge. As the days stretched into a week, Shadow and Spirit settled into an unusual rhythm. The old wolf's protective instincts, dormant for so long, were fully awakened. He watched over Spirit with a vigilance that surprised even himself. Each morning, Shadow nudged Spirit upright, guiding him gently with his muzzle until the colt's knees steadied. Sometimes, Spirit would tumble into a bush or collapse on a patch of clover, but he'd always look up to find Shadow waiting patiently, never far away. Spirit, for his part, became Shadow's eager shadow. He followed the wolf everywhere, mimicking his every move. When Shadow drank from the cold stream at sunrise, Spirit dipped his muzzle in the water, splashing and snorting until he got the hang of it. When Shadow explored a hollow log for insects or sniffed the wind for distant scents, Spirit watched intently, trying to understand what the old wolf sensed. The colt's trust was absolute, born out of necessity, perhaps, but growing deeper with every act of care. Back at the main ranger station, the situation had become a topic of heated debate. The small staff huddled around computer screens, reviewing hours of footage collected by Sierra and her supervisor. Sierra sat near the edge of her chair, unable to hide her enthusiasm. "It's not just survival," she argued, voice animated. "Look at them. Spirit's learning from Shadow. He's copying everything. It's like imprinting, but across species lines." One of the older rangers, a stoic man named Briggs, frowned. "A wolf is still a wolf. We can't assume he won't turn on the foal." Sierra shot back. "He's had plenty of chances, but all he's done is protect him. If anything, Shadow's teaching Spirit how to survive out here." Briggs folded his arms, unconvinced. "This is unnatural. The board's going to want to intervene." But Sierra wasn't alone in her fascination. Even the head of the sanctuary, a cautious woman named Miriam, found herself drawn to the story unfolding on her monitors. She'd never seen anything like it, not in all her years of wildlife management. "Maybe," she said during a staff meeting, "what we're seeing is the exception that proves the rule. Let's keep watching. This could teach us more than any textbook." Outside, the weather softened, and the days grew warmer. The fields around Shadow and Spirit erupted in wildflowers. Bees buzzed between the blooms. Dragonflies skimmed over puddles left by the receding storm. For the first time in Spirit's short life, he was strong enough to explore. Under Shadow's watchful gaze, Spirit ventured further each day, testing his legs, leaping over fallen branches, and occasionally trying to run, only to trip and tumble in the grass. Each fall was met by the wolf's gentle nudge, as if to say, "Try again." Spirit always did. Spirit. The other wild horses, meanwhile, kept their distance. Their instincts warred with their curiosity. A few mares would edge closer, noses flaring, ears forward. They'd stare at the pair, wolf and foal side by side, then retreat, tossing their manes in confusion. The herd's stallion, a powerful gray named Thunder, snorted and stamped whenever Shadow approached, making it clear he was not welcome near the main herd. Spirit watched them with longing, but he never strayed far from his unlikely guardian. One afternoon, as clouds drifted lazily overhead, Spirit made a bolder attempt to join the horses. Drawn by a trio of young colts playing near the edge of the field, Spirit trotted toward them, nickering softly. The colts paused their game, curious but wary. Shadow watched from a distance. His eyes narrowed, body tense but unmoving. Spirit whinnied, hoping for a welcome, but the other colts shied away, skittering back to their mothers. The stallion let out a sharp, warning snort, and the herd shifted as one, moving further into the meadow. Spirit stopped, confused, watching the herd drift away. He lowered his head, ears drooping. After a moment he turned back, picking his way through the tall grass to Shadow's side. It was a small heartbreak, but Shadow greeted Spirit with a gentle nose nuzzle, reassuring him without words. Spirit pressed closer, finding comfort in the wolf's presence. Sierra watched this scene from the office and felt an ache in her own chest. She knew the colt would one day need to rejoin his kind, but for now, Shadow was all he had. As the days went by, Spirit grew bolder, his trust in Shadow unshakable. He tried to howl with the wolf, producing an odd mix of a whinny and a yelp that made Shadow pause, then huff quietly in amusement. Sometimes, at sunset, Shadow would sit on a rise overlooking the field and let out a mournful howl, low, haunting, and ancient. Spirit would try to join in, his own call wild and uncertain, echoing off the trees. The sound carried across the sanctuary, causing even the most seasoned rangers to shiver. In the sanctuary office, the staff gathered every evening to watch the footage. The arguments faded as even the skeptics began to marvel at the connection growing between predator and prey. Sierra took meticulous notes, documenting Spirit's physical progress, Shadow's attentive behaviors, and every new milestone the foal reached. She sent daily updates to the board, hoping to delay any intervention as long as possible. She knew they were witnessing something rare, a story that might change the way people thought about both wolves and horses. Yet, even as Shadow and Spirit's bond grew, trouble brewed beneath the surface. Not everyone was content to let nature take its course. Whispers of concern floated through the sanctuary's management meetings. Some board members insisted this was an unnatural experiment, dangerous for both animals and the sanctuary's reputation. They pressured Miriam to make a decision, but she held firm. For now. Meanwhile, Spirit continued to thrive. With Shadow at his side, he learned how to navigate the wild, where to find water, how to shelter from rain, which plants to avoid. He learned the rhythm of the forest, the subtle signs of danger, the call of birds warning of strangers, the scent of foxes and raccoons passing in the night. Shadow, for his part, rediscovered the joy of companionship and purpose. He grew stronger, more alert, his limp less pronounced as days passed. The two moved together through the sanctuary, an inseparable pair, watched over by both humans and animals, their story quietly rewriting the rules of the wild. But as dusk fell on their 7th day together, and the stars pricked the sky above whispering pines, a silent tension lingered. Change was coming. The bond between Shadow and Spirit, born out of desperation, had become a force all its own, a beacon of hope and a challenge to the old order. For now, the sanctuary held its breath, waiting to see what the wild would teach next. In the weeks that followed, the story of Shadow and Spirit rippled quietly through every corner of Whispering Pines Wildlife Sanctuary. It began as a whisper, rangers exchanging glances over morning coffee, volunteers speaking in hushed awe about the wolf and the foal who moved through the mist like an echo of some ancient myth. But as word spread, what had begun as fascination soon shaded into concern. Inside the administration building, beneath flickering fluorescent lights and faded wildlife posters, a board meeting was called in haste. Miriam, the sanctuary's director, presided over a room split by curiosity and worry. Footage from the last 2 weeks flickered on a monitor at the center of the table. Shadow and Spirit drinking together at the creek, the wolf nosing the foal upright after a tumble, the colt mimicking his unlikely guardian. The images were undeniably powerful, stirring something primal and hopeful in even the most jaded onlookers, but not everyone was impressed. "It's dangerous," argued one board member, a biologist with decades of experience. "Wolves are predators. This bond is not only unnatural, it could end in disaster for both animals. What if the wolf turns? What if the herd rejects the foal forever?" Another, a legal advisor, shook his head. "If this goes wrong and someone films it, if it goes viral, what will that do to our reputation? We're supposed to protect these animals, not play at being nature's referees." Miriam listened, eyes narrowed. "Our policies exist to give the wild a chance to work things out without us interfering unless there's immediate harm. Right now, all we have is an orphaned foal alive because of a wolf. That's not a problem. That's a miracle." The tension in the room was palpable. Sierra, present as the youngest voice and as the only one who had watched every second unfold, gripped her notebook tightly. "They're not just surviving, they're thriving. I think this could change what we know about animal behavior," she said softly. "If we step in now, we might ruin something precious." But even Sierra could feel the pressure mounting. The sanctuary's board wasn't the only group aware of Shadow's past. That afternoon, as clouds drifted over the sanctuary, a faded folder appeared on Miriam's desk, Shadow's original file. Years ago, rangers had found the injured wolf near a rural farm's boundary, his leg broken, fur matted with blood, and eyes wild with pain and distrust. He had survived because of a risky rescue by the sanctuary's founding ranger, an old man now retired. While Shadow had never shown aggression toward humans or the sanctuary's herds, his history suggested a wolf that had once brushed close to human life and perhaps learned some lessons not found in the deep woods. As dusk fell, Miriam called Sierra into her office. The two sat facing the window, golden sunlight spilling across piles of reports and maps. "You know Shadow better than anyone here," Miriam said, voice low. "Tell me honestly, do you trust him?" Sierra hesitated, looking out at the sanctuary's wild heart, where wolf and foal now moved as one. "I do," she said finally. "I trust his instincts. He's lost so much. I think caring for Spirit gives him purpose." Miriam nodded slowly, but worry lingered in her eyes. While debate swirled indoors, the animals outside carried on, their own laws and traditions unchanged by human concern. The wild horses had grown accustomed to Spirit's presence at a distance. But Thunder, the dominant stallion, watched Shadow with relentless suspicion. Sometimes, as dust settled, the herd would circle around Spirit, testing his loyalty with whinnies and snorts, but the colt always drifted back to Shadow's side before nightfall. Spirit grew braver as the weeks passed. He challenged the boundaries of his new life, galloping in short, clumsy bursts through the meadow, skidding to a stop just before the creek, then darting back to Shadow, heart pounding and mane flying. He watched the other colts, longing for their acceptance. But he never wandered too far from his guardian. Shadow, for his part, seemed both teacher and protector, showing Spirit how to sense changes in the wind, how to freeze when deer bolted at distant danger, how to hunker down as a thunderstorm swept over the trees. Not all the wildlife in Whispering Pines respected the boundary the wolf and colt had carved out for themselves. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the pines and long shadows crept across the fields, a pair of young coyotes slunk from the underbrush, drawn by the scent of the foal. They yipped and darted at the edge of the clearing, eyes gleaming with mischief and hunger. Spirit tensed, ears flicking in alarm. Shadow stood tall, hackles raised, and let out a rumbling growl that sent the coyotes scattering back into the dark. Spirit's heart raced, but he found comfort in the wolf's steady presence. That night, Spirit pressed as close as he could to Shadow, falling asleep to the slow, even rhythm of the old wolf's breathing. At the security office, Sierra continued her vigil. She cataloged every encounter, every moment of affection and tension. She sent her growing file to a wildlife researcher at a distant university, hoping for answers. The reply she received was cautious but intrigued. What you're witnessing may be unique. Some animals, especially those marked by trauma, can defy our categories. But be careful, nature is never predictable. As the sanctuary staff debated, a new policy emerged. Miriam issued a quiet directive. No interference unless there's imminent danger, but double the monitoring, keep daily logs, prepare for all outcomes. Even as she wrote the memo, she felt the weight of the unknown pressing in. Was this truly a miracle, or a tragedy waiting to unfold? Days bled into nights, and back again, and the world beyond the sanctuary began to take notice. Word of the wolf and the foal made its way into a local newspaper after a visiting journalist overheard two volunteers arguing about the footage. A short article, unlikely bond at wildlife sanctuary, ran on page 3, featuring a blurry, still image of Spirit and Shadow drinking at the creek. Social media caught the story and spun it into myth and rumor. Comments ranged from wonder, nature is incredible, to fear, this can't be allowed. Back in her room that evening, Sierra read the article and watched the hundreds of reactions scroll by. She felt the fragile hope inside her harden into determination. The world was watching now. What happened next would matter, not just for Shadow and Spirit, but for the sanctuary and every lesson it could teach about compassion, survival, and the blurry boundaries between instinct and love. Out in the dark, as a breeze rustled the branches and the stars wheeled overhead, Shadow and Spirit curled together beneath the old oak. They did not know they had become a symbol, or that their days of peace might be numbered. They simply rested, together, trusting that for one more night, the world would let them be. For weeks, the oddity of a wolf raising a foal rippled through the sanctuary like a stone skipping across a pond, widening circles of debate, fascination, and anxiety. Yet, life for Shadow and Spirit was measured in smaller, quieter moments. The rhythm of morning sun across dew-damp grass, the cautious greetings from distant horses, the silent watch Shadow kept every dusk. But beyond the tranquility, an old enemy of the wild was stirring, one that cared nothing for the miracle unfolding at Whispering Pines. Rumors of poachers had drifted around the sanctuary's borders since spring. At first, it was just whispers. A hoofprint near the north fence, the snap of a twig late at night, the distant growl of an ATV engine after midnight. Sierra, ever watchful, kept detailed logs. Nothing conclusive, her supervisor muttered. Just be vigilant. But the warnings grew more urgent after a nearby ranch lost 3 prized Mustangs. A ranger found a cut section of barbed wire and tire tracks leading toward the woods, straight toward sanctuary land. Inside the sanctuary, security protocols were quietly raised. Rangers did late-night patrols in pairs, and new cameras went up at the outer boundaries. Sierra pushed for more, but with resources stretched thin and no concrete evidence, every extra shift felt like a gamble. "We're a sanctuary, not a fortress," Briggs grumbled as he loaded fresh batteries into a trail cam one evening. "We can't protect everything all the time." Still, the threat hung over every meeting like a thundercloud. Shadow sensed the change in the air long before the humans did. Instinct kept him on edge. The odd scent carried on a southern wind, the hush that fell over the trees just before dusk, the crows that scattered in alarm when a figure passed too close to the fence. Some ancient part of him remembered other dangers. Men with metal in their hands, sharp smells of sweat and oil, the crack of gunfire. Shadow prowled more at night, circling the places where the forest met the open fields, nose twitching, hackles raised. Spirit, sensing his guardian's tension, grew anxious too. He was bolder now, stronger, his muscles filling out beneath his soft coat. But whenever Shadow stilled and stared into the dark, Spirit would freeze, breath shallow, trusting the old wolf's senses above his own. Some nights they slept little, ears pricked at every sound. The gentle security of their earlier weeks was being replaced by a prickling unease. Sierra noticed the shift in their behavior. On her monitors, Shadow appeared restless, making wider patrols, sometimes stopping to sniff the air, head high and tail stiff. Spirit trailed close, but even his playful energy seemed muted by the wolf's anxiety. Sierra documented it all, but when she raised her concerns at a staff meeting, Briggs only shrugged. "Animals know when something's up," he said, "but that doesn't mean it's poachers." Miriam, however, wasn't convinced. "Keep a close watch," she ordered, "and let's not take any chances." Then, one windless night, Sierra saw something that made her blood run cold. The camera near the old north barn picked up movement. 3 shadowy figures crawling along the fence line, flashlights flickering, voices a low murmur. Sierra's heart pounded. She hit the alert and radioed the rangers. "Movement at north boundary. Looks like trespassers. I count 3. Possible poachers. They're heading toward the old barn." On the grainy feed, a 4th figure appeared, carrying something long, rifle or crowbar, she couldn't tell. Miriam's voice crackled back. "Urgent. All available units. North barn, now." As the rangers scrambled, the intruders cut through the fence and slipped inside. The barn, disused for years, was now a makeshift shelter for several rescued foals, including Spirit, who'd begun visiting during the day, drawn by the scents of hay and other young horses. Shadow, never far from Spirit, caught the human scent first. His lips peeled back in a silent snarl, eyes flashing with a memory of pain and violence. Inside the barn, Spirit trembled, the air thick with unfamiliar danger. One of the poachers crept toward the stalls, a flashlight beam sweeping across the straw. He muttered, "Just grab the pretty ones, quick." Another laughed. "They'll fetch 10 grand a head if we're lucky. Move it." The sound of their voices sent a jolt of terror through Spirit. He bolted toward the far wall, but the gate was latched. Shadow was already moving, no longer slow or careful, but fierce, silent, a creature built for survival. He burst through a loose board and hurled himself between the men and the frightened foals, growling deep and low. The poachers cursed and backed up, not expecting a wolf. "What the? There's a wolf in here," one hissed. Another leveled his rifle, but Shadow lunged, snapping at his arm. The gun went off with a deafening crack, splintering wood but missing its mark. Horses screamed, kicking at their stalls, panic spreading like wildfire. Outside, the commotion drew Sierra's attention. On her radio, the rangers reported, "We're 5 minutes out." Sierra, not willing to wait, grabbed a flashlight and sprinted across the field, rain lashing her face as a sudden storm rolled in. Lightning flickered over the treetops, casting wild shadows on the grass. She could hear Spirit's desperate whinnies, the angry shouts of men, and the guttural snarls of Shadow, defending the only family he had left. Shadow's attacks stalled the poachers, giving Spirit and the other foals a chance to kick free their gates. One foal bolted, drawing a poacher's attention. Shadow hurled himself again, teeth flashing, catching a man's sleeve and sending him sprawling. "Shoot him!" someone yelled. The men fumbled, chaos rising as thunder rolled. Just then, Sierra burst into the barn, shining her flashlight directly into the poachers' faces. "Sanctuary Rangers, get away from those animals!" she screamed, voice raw with adrenaline. The poachers hesitated, then scattered, one bolting through a broken window, another slipping out the back as the first of the rangers arrived, sirens wailing through the downpour. But not before one poacher, desperate and cornered, swung his rifle at Shadow. The butt of the gun struck the old wolf hard across his side. Shadow yelped, crumpling to the floor. Spirit, wild with fear and rage, ran to his side, neighing, pressing his nose into Shadow's fur. Rangers rushed in, pinning 2 of the men to the ground. The last slipped away into the trees, but not before Sierra caught him on her phone's camera, face illuminated by lightning. The rangers quickly herded the remaining foals into a safe pen. The storm raged outside, but inside, the focus shifted to Shadow, bloodied, barely conscious, Spirit refusing to leave his side. The aftermath was chaotic. Police arrived, paramedics for the rangers, a veterinarian for the animals. The barn, battered and smoky, echoed with the frightened cries of horses and the worried shouts of people. Through it all, Spirit stood guard over Shadow, nudging him, refusing food or water, stubborn as the wolf who had taught him how to survive. Sierra knelt beside them, her hands trembling, murmuring soft words she hoped would reach the old wolf's fading senses. Outside, the rain washed blood and fear from the earth. The immediate threat had passed, but the cost of heroism would be counted in the days to come, and the legend of a wolf who protected a foal, even at the risk of his own life, grew stronger, whispered by every heart that called the sanctuary home. The rain finally gave way to a sullen, smoky dawn. Over whispering pines, mist rose from the battered earth, coiling through blackened grass and broken fence posts. In the sanctuary's heart, every animal trembled, nerves frayed from the night's violence. But the worst had not yet passed. As the sun struggled through low clouds, a new, more insidious danger crept toward the recovering sanctuary, one that would test every bond, every ounce of courage that had blossomed in this fragile world. Hours after the failed poacher raid, sanctuary staff scrambled to repair the damage. Briggs led a team patching the north fence, jaw tight, eyes flicking anxiously to the tree line. Miriam coordinated with police and animal control, reviewing camera footage and logging every detail for the authorities. Sierra, refusing rest, sat beside Shadow and Spirit in the temporary medical shed, watching over them as the vet tended the old wolf's wounds. Spirit hovered, refusing food, his large eyes glassy with exhaustion and fear. Shadow drifted in and out of consciousness. Pain pulsed along his battered ribs and side, where the rifle butt had struck him. The world around him was a shifting haze. Voices, hands, sharp smells of medicine and disinfectant. Yet whenever he awoke, Spirit was always there. The colt pressed close to his fur, whimpering, refusing to be parted. The other rescued foals, traumatized but unharmed, were herded into a reinforced pen, watched by rangers with uneasy eyes. But danger lingered, more cunning than before. That evening, as the sanctuary's day shift ended, an unnatural quiet settled over the property. Out by the western fence, hidden by thick brush, two men crouched low, whispering. The failed raid had cost them dearly. A lost truck, 2 friends in jail, and bruises that would not soon fade. Their anger burned hotter than any grievance. "We'll make them pay," one hissed, striking a match with shaking hands. The other emptied a canister of gasoline into a pile of old straw and fence rails, then tossed the match onto the heap. Within minutes, orange flames leapt into the dusk. Smoke curled through the sanctuary, riding a sudden gust of wind straight toward the old barn. Sparks popped and scattered, igniting grass and brush. Animals panicked. Deer bounded for the woods, foxes bolted for their dens, and in the barn, the foals screamed, hooves thundering on the wooden floor. Sierra was first to smell the smoke. She bolted upright, heart hammering, as a siren shrieked from the main gate. "Fire! West fence!" someone yelled on the radio. Briggs barked orders, sending rangers sprinting for hoses and shovels. Miriam grabbed her phone, dialing the fire department with shaking fingers, eyes darting to the security monitors. On one screen, a lone figure moved toward the barn. Shadow, limping but determined, dragging himself up from the cot where the vet had left him. Spirit, frantic, ran after him. The wind shifted, blowing hot smoke toward the barn. Inside, panic erupted. Foals reared and kicked, desperate to escape. Shadow reached the barn door first, forcing it open with his shoulder. The heat was intense, the air heavy with fear. He barked, deep and urgent, driving the foals toward the back exit. Spirit, still limping from exhaustion, hesitated until Shadow nudged him hard, then followed the other foals through the smoke. Outside, the flames roared higher. The poachers lurking in the trees watched with grim satisfaction, until a sudden, piercing howl shattered the night. Shadow stood in the barn doorway, head thrown back, voice rising above the chaos. It was a call older than language. Warning, summoning, defiance. Spirit, hearing the howl, echoed with his own trembling voice, a strange blend of neigh and cry. Across the sanctuary, animals paused, hearts pounding. Even the rangers stopped, stunned by the sound. Sierra, racing toward the barn, saw Shadow's silhouette framed by fire. "No!" she screamed, pushing through the smoke. The other rangers arrived, swinging open the back gates, leading the panicked foals to safety. Spirit whirled, refusing to leave the burning barn without Shadow. He ran to the wolf's side, nudging him, refusing to move. Shadow growled softly, then limped forward, guiding Spirit with him, but a collapsing beam sent sparks flying, forcing them back. The fire spread with terrifying speed. Briggs and another ranger battled the flames, hoses sputtering as water arced onto the barn's roof. Miriam called out orders, her voice ragged, as the fire truck finally arrived, sirens wailing. The first responders rushed in, axes and extinguishers in hand. Inside the barn, Shadow and Spirit were trapped, blocked by debris, heat pressing in from every side. Shadow, drawing on the last reserves of his strength, nudged Spirit toward a side window. The colt balked, afraid, but Shadow barked, insistent. Sierra, peering through the haze, saw their shadows flickering. She called to Spirit, voice cracked with desperation. "Come on, boy! You can do it!" At last, Spirit reared back and with a desperate leap crashed through the window, glass and wood splintering around him. He staggered outside, bleeding but alive. Shadow, lungs burning, tried to follow, but the flames were everywhere now. Smoke poured in, choking and thick. Just as the fireman breached the side door, Shadow collapsed, the world shrinking to a narrow tunnel of pain and heat. Strong hands lifted him, wrapping him in a fire blanket, rushing him out into the night. Outside, Spirit rushed to Shadow, neighing wildly, nudging the wolf's soot-blackened fur. Sierra knelt beside them, tears streaming down her face as paramedics worked to stabilize the wolf. "He saved them," she whispered, voice thick. "He saved them all." Briggs squeezed her shoulder, awe softening his usual gruffness. "Never seen anything like it," he murmured. The fire was finally brought under control, but the barn was gutted, a blackened skeleton against the dawn. The poachers fled into the dark, faces lost to the smoke, but their damage was done. Police combed the woods, but found only footprints and empty gasoline cans. In the aftermath, the sanctuary was changed. Staff and animals alike were shaken, but alive. The footage of Shadow's stand, his limp, his howl, his unwavering defense of the foals, circulated among the rangers, then to the authorities, and finally to the press. Sierra uploaded a copy to the sanctuary's social media, and the world's reaction was immediate. Comments flooded in, praise, disbelief, prayers for Shadow's recovery. "A hero," one person wrote, "in fur and fang." But for Spirit, the world narrowed to a single, fragile hope: Shadow's survival. He lay beside the old wolf in the sanctuary's infirmary, refusing food, his trust now absolute. Sierra slept nearby, unwilling to leave either of them, drawing comfort from Spirit's silent vigil. The fight for Whispering Pines was not yet over, but on that smoky, chaotic night, courage had roared louder than fear. And as the sun rose over blackened fields, Spirit pressed his nose to Shadow's battered flank, whispering a promise. "I'm not leaving you. Not now. Not ever." Dawn crept over Whispering Pines with an uneasy hush, the world tinted in hues of gray and gold. The storm and fire had passed, but the scars left behind were raw and fresh. Blackened grass curled along the sanctuary's western edge. The skeleton of the old barn jutted upward like a warning. Most of all, a heavy silence pressed down on those who had witnessed the impossible fight for life. The kind of silence that only follows disaster. Shadow lay on a blanket in the makeshift infirmary, his breath shallow, flanks stained with smoke and blood. A patchwork of gauze and ointment covered the worst of his burns. Sierra, eyes gritty with exhaustion, hovered nearby. She hadn't slept in more than a day, refusing to leave the wolf who had become a legend overnight. Spirit stood vigil beside Shadow, pressing his muzzle to the wolf's cheek, nudging him whenever his breathing seemed too slow, his big eyes shining with panic and loyalty. The other foals, shaken but unharmed, had already been tended to and reunited with the herd. Their frightened calls faded into the background as rangers coaxed them back to the main paddock, trying to restore some semblance of normalcy. But for Spirit, nothing was normal anymore. Every sound, every scent, every shadow was filtered through worry for the old wolf who had saved him. Throughout the morning, sanctuary staff moved in a daze. Briggs directed repairs, barely speaking, his usual gruffness subdued by awe and fatigue. Miriam held meetings with local law enforcement and fire officials, her phone constantly buzzing with calls from the press. Even as she handled logistics, her thoughts strayed back to the wolf and foal at the center of it all. Sierra's video had gone viral overnight. The sanctuary's inbox overflowed with messages: journalists, animal lovers, donations, and volunteers offering help. But no message could mend the ache in Sierra's chest as she watched Shadow struggle for each breath. The vet, Dr. Parker, did what she could. She injected antibiotics, stitched wounds, and monitored Shadow's pulse. "He's old," she warned Sierra quietly, "and the injuries are severe. We have to prepare ourselves for the worst." Sierra shook her head, her fingers tightening on Spirit's mane. "He can't die. Not after everything he's done. He just can't." Dr. Parker's voice softened. "He's already done more than most would ever dare." For Spirit, time lost meaning. He stayed glued to Shadow's side, refusing food, shoving away water, barely resting. When anyone tried to coax him away, he let out a frantic, broken whinny. At night, he stood guard while Sierra slept in a chair nearby, her head resting on folded arms, one hand always reaching out to Shadow's fur. In those dark hours, the sanctuary seemed to hold its breath, waiting for fate to decide the old wolf's future. Outside, the news of Shadow's heroism spread far and wide. Television crews camped outside the gates. Children sent handmade cards, crayon drawings of a gray wolf and a brown foal, always side by side, always safe. Sierra read every letter aloud, hoping the words might somehow reach the ailing wolf. "You're a hero, Shadow," she said softly one afternoon, her voice trembling. "Everyone knows what you did. Spirit knows. I know." The wolf's ear twitched faintly, but he did not open his eyes. The rangers took turns sitting with Shadow, bringing updates from the world beyond the infirmary. Briggs, never one for sentiment, left a battered baseball cap beside the wolf. "Luck's got to count for something," he muttered. Miriam brought fresh flowers, setting them near the window so Shadow and Spirit could see the wild colors waving in the breeze. Even Thunder, the dominant stallion, appeared one evening at the fence line, snorting and pawing the ground until Spirit acknowledged him. The wild horses had witnessed the flames and chaos. Now their silent presence was a sign of respect. Despite every effort, Shadow's condition worsened. Fever swept through his battered body, and his wounds began to fester. Spirit grew frantic, nudging the wolf, pawing at him, letting out plaintive whinnies. Sierra did everything she could: fresh water, soothing words, cool cloths to ease the fever. But the old wolf was slipping away, his strength pouring out with every ragged breath. One night, under a sky streaked with stars, Shadow's breathing grew shallow. Sierra sat beside him, voice shaking as she whispered, "You did good, old friend. You saved Spirit. You saved us all." Tears tracked down her cheeks. Spirit, sensing the shift, pressed his head against Shadow's side, refusing to move. Dr. Parker came in quietly, checked Shadow's pulse, and shook her head. "It's almost time," she murmured. Sierra reached out, her hand trembling, and stroked Shadow's ear. "Thank you," she whispered, her words barely more than breath. "Thank you for loving him. Thank you for not giving up." As dawn edged the sky in pink and gold, Shadow let out a final soft sigh. His body relaxed, the pain leaving at last, and his eyes slipped closed forever. For a long time no one moved. Sierra sobbed, her shoulders shaking with grief. Spirit stood frozen, staring at his guardian's still form, unable to process the loss. Spirit did not eat for days. He wandered the edge of the infirmary, stopping often to stare at the place where Shadow had lain. The sanctuary staff watched helplessly, bringing fresh hay and apples, coaxing Spirit with gentle words and songs. But the colt refused all comfort, haunted by the absence of the wolf who had given him life, love, and belonging. The news of Shadow's passing brought an outpouring of sorrow and support. Flowers and cards arrived by the dozens. Artists painted murals of the wolf and the foal, their bond captured in sweeping brushstrokes and vibrant colors. Sierra led the arrangements for Shadow's burial. She chose a quiet spot beneath an ancient oak on the edge of the sanctuary, the very tree where Spirit had first found warmth beside the wolf all those weeks ago. The staff, volunteers, and even a few townspeople gathered in the soft light of a late afternoon. Sierra gave a short, trembling speech, her words carrying across the silent field. Shadow wasn't just a wolf. He was family, to Spirit, to me, to all of us who believe in miracles. As the staff lowered the old wolf's body into the earth, Spirit stood beside the grave, head bowed, tail still. A hush settled, broken only by the wind sighing through the oak leaves. For days afterward, Spirit returned to the tree, standing in silent vigil. His coat grew dull and his steps slow, but slowly, with gentle encouragement from Sierra and the rest of the staff, Spirit began to accept food again. He allowed the other foals to graze nearby, tolerated Thunder's watchful presence, and even let Sierra stroke his neck as she whispered promises that Shadow would never be forgotten. Though the cost had been great, Shadow's heroism became legend at Whispering Pines. His memory echoed through every shadow and every sunrise, reminding all who live there that love, no matter how unlikely, could reshape the wildest heart, and that the bonds we choose can be stronger than any we are born to. In the days that followed Shadow's passing, Whispering Pines Wildlife Sanctuary felt altered, quieter, gentler, and somehow more fragile. The wind through the pines seemed softer, and the birds sang with a new kind of melancholy. Though life in the sanctuary continued, deer grazing, foxes darting along fence lines, rangers going about their routines, there was a shared sense among all that something irreplaceable had gone. For Spirit, the world had shrunk to the patch of earth beneath the old oak where Shadow now rested. He returned to the grave again and again, standing silently for hours, sometimes nuzzling the dirt, sometimes just staring at nothing. Rangers watched from a distance, worried by his refusal to eat and the heavy sadness in his eyes. He turned away from the other foals, and even from Thunder, the powerful stallion whose calls once drew Spirit's longing gaze. Spirit was caught between worlds, the herd he had never truly joined and the lone wolf who had given him his first sense of belonging. Sierra felt his pain as her own. She spent long hours near the oak, keeping quiet company with Spirit. Sometimes she read aloud from her journal, recounting stories of Shadow's heroism, the first stormy night, and the lessons Spirit had learned at the wolf's side. "You're not alone," she would whisper, gently stroking his neck as he shivered in the twilight. "He loved you. We all do." Sierra's voice, rough with grief but warm with hope, slowly coaxed Spirit back from the edge of despair. It was a time of mourning, but also of reflection. Miriam, Briggs, and the rest of the sanctuary's staff gathered one evening to remember Shadow. Around a small fire, they took turns sharing memories. Sierra recalling the first night she saw the wolf nudge the newborn foal, Briggs describing the awe he felt watching a predator become a protector. Even the old retired ranger, who had once rescued Shadow from a trap, came by to lay a weathered hand on Spirit's mane, whispering a blessing in the language of the wild. The sanctuary, meanwhile, was inundated with support. Donations poured in from across the country, enough to repair the barn, expand the paddocks, and install new security measures. Artists sent paintings and sculptures, children mailed letters and drawings, news crews arrived and, with the staff's permission, filmed respectful segments about Shadow's life and sacrifice. For once, the world was watching not for tragedy or scandal, but for a story of hope and compassion. But for Spirit, healing did not come quickly. In the first week after Shadow's burial, he ate little and slept less. He stood apart from the herd, eyes dull and ears drooping, sometimes letting out soft, mournful whinnies as the sun set beyond the pines. The other foals approached, curious but unsure how to bridge the gap between them and the orphaned colt who had learned to trust a wolf. One morning, as the mist lifted off the grass, something shifted. Spirit woke to the gentle nudging of Sierra's hand and the sound of the herd grazing nearby. Thunder, the stallion, watched from a distance, his gaze more accepting than before. One of the younger colts trotted over, sniffing Spirit curiously. For a long moment, Spirit stood perfectly still. Then, hesitantly, he reached out, nose to nose. The two colts touched muzzles, and the ice began to break. From that day, Spirit allowed himself to drift nearer the herd, lingering at the edge, never fully joining, but no longer hiding. Thunder approached more often, watching over the foal with the wary but respectful distance reserved for those who had survived the worst and still remained standing. The other foals learned to accept Spirit's presence. They would race across the paddock, glancing back to see if he would join. Slowly, Spirit began to run again. At first, just a few hesitant steps, then longer, faster, as if recalling the lessons Shadow had taught him about courage and the wild. Sierra watched every step with pride and relief. She visited Shadow's grave daily, laying wildflowers and reading the latest letters sent by children. "You're not forgotten," she promised the old wolf, her voice soft but certain. "He's getting stronger. We all are." The sanctuary became a place not only of healing for animals, but for the people who cared for them. Rangers who once doubted Spirit's future now marveled at his resilience. Volunteers came from distant towns just to catch a glimpse of the colt who had survived through the kindness of a wolf. At night, Spirit would return to the oak tree, standing in the moonlight, silent and still. Sometimes Sierra joined him, sitting cross-legged in the grass, sharing stories of hope and renewal. The stars overhead seemed brighter in those quiet moments, as if the wild itself was holding its breath, blessing the unlikely journey from loss to possibility. Shadow's grave became a place of pilgrimage for many. Visitors left tokens, a feather, a smooth stone, a folded note of thanks. Miriam, moved by the outpouring, dedicated a small plaque at the base of the oak. "Here lies Shadow, who taught us the wildest hearts can also be the kindest." The story reached beyond the sanctuary, inspiring schools to teach lessons about compassion and survival, and other sanctuaries to share their own tales of interspecies bonds. Yet, healing was not only about remembering, it was about embracing the future. As Spirit grew, his coat shone in the sunlight, and his muscles filled out from daily runs. He learned to graze with the herd, trust the humans who cared for him, and listen to the subtle language of the wild. Sometimes he would pause in the paddock, ears flicking at the sound of a distant howl or a breeze rustling the leaves, as if still hearing Shadow's voice guiding him. Sierra completed her wildlife behavior study, using her journals, camera footage, and interviews with the staff. She submitted her work to a major conservation journal and received a flurry of interest from scientists worldwide. The sanctuary was invited to present Spirits and Shadows' story at conferences and in classrooms, spreading the message that sometimes the best lessons came not from textbooks, but from the wild itself. As the season turned, Whispering Pines found a new equilibrium. Spirit, forever marked by loss and love, grew into a strong young stallion. His story became the sanctuary's story, a testament to the power of compassion, the importance of letting nature unfold, and the healing that comes from saying goodbye while still believing in new beginnings. And every evening, as dusk settled and the shadows lengthened, Spirit would stand beneath the old oak, his silhouette framed by fading light. He would listen to the wind in the branches, feeling in his heart that while Shadow was gone, his presence would never truly fade. In that space between memory and hope, Spirit took his first steps into a future that was forever changed, but never alone. Months slipped quietly by, marked by the slow turning of seasons over Whispering Pines. Spring's bright green faded to the golden hush of summer. Then the first red leaves began to gather around the roots of the old oak. Though life in the sanctuary moved on, babies born, fences mended, routines falling into place, the memory of Shadow and Spirit's extraordinary bond never faded. Instead, it grew into legend, a living thread woven through the hearts of everyone who called this place home. Spirit grew into a strong, beautiful young stallion. His brown coat glistened in the sunlight, the white blaze on his face now a mark recognized by visitors and rangers alike. He ran freely with the herd, no longer the orphaned foal at the edge, but a leader in his own right, guiding younger colts and fillies with a quiet confidence that seemed to echo his lost guardian. Sometimes, in the cool of early morning, he would rear up and race the wind, mane flying, hooves thundering across the paddock, a living testament to survival and resilience. Yet even as he embraced his place among the horses, Spirit's heart was always pulled toward the oak tree at the sanctuary's edge. Nearly every day he would wander there at sunset, standing in silent reflection beneath the branches where Shadow now lay. Sometimes Sierra joined him, brushing his coat, her own eyes misty as she recalled the journey they had all survived together. The world had changed, but the memory of the bond between wolf and foal remained. more powerful with each retelling. Outside the sanctuary, the story reached far and wide. Sierra, with Miriam's blessing, finished editing her wildlife documentary, a project months in the making. She called it A Wolf's Heart. The film wove together raw camera footage, her own journals, interviews with staff, and the countless letters and drawings sent by children moved by the tale. The premiere was held at a major conservation film festival, where the audience watched in stunned silence. The orphaned foal shivering in the rain, Shadow's protective stance, their struggle against poachers, and the fire that changed everything. The footage of Spirit lying beside Shadow's battered body, refusing to leave him, left few dry eyes in the room. After the film ended, the applause was thunderous. Conservationists, scientists, teachers, and even skeptical ranchers approached Sierra and the sanctuary staff, asking questions, sharing their own stories, and promising to support wildlife in new ways. The documentary sparked new donations, educational programs, and interest from scientists studying interspecies bonds and animal trauma. For Sierra, it was a bittersweet triumph, a chance to honor Shadow and Spirit and to spread the message that true compassion in the wild often defies expectation. At Whispering Pines, the sanctuary changed too. The board agreed to expand the land protected under their care, building new barns and observation posts, and hiring additional staff. They created a scholarship in Shadow's name for young rangers and biologists dedicated to wildlife rehabilitation. A local artist unveiled a sculpture beside the old oak, an iron wolf and a foal standing side by side, looking toward the horizon, forever together, in metal and memory. Spirit's journey inspired change beyond the sanctuary's fences. Schools invited Sierra to speak, sharing the story with children who had only seen wolves and horses in books. She showed them videos of Spirit learning to howl, Shadow teaching him to be brave, and reminded them that sometimes the wildest hearts held the greatest kindness. Her talks closed with the lesson she herself had learned. Sometimes the wild teaches us compassion better than we teach ourselves. And the bonds we choose can change the world. Visitors flocked to Whispering Pines, drawn by the legend. Many left quietly moved, reflecting on the improbable love and courage they had witnessed. Some stayed to volunteer, planting wildflowers along the fence line or caring for rescued animals. For Spirit, their gentle presence was a comfort, though he remained most at peace with Sierra and the other horses who had watched him grow. As Spirit matured, the other horses looked to him in moments of danger. His early lessons in vigilance, trust, and resilience made him a natural leader. When a new foal lost its mother to illness, it was Spirit who stood beside her, offering silent comfort, just as Shadow had done for him. Through his actions, the cycle of compassion continued, echoing far beyond what anyone could have imagined. On the anniversary of Shadow's passing, the sanctuary held a quiet ceremony beneath the oak. Rangers, staff, and volunteers gathered to lay flowers and share memories. Sierra spoke softly, her words drifting on the summer breeze. Shadow showed us that the wild is not just a place of struggle, but a place of miracles. He gave Spirit hope, and in doing so, he gave all of us hope. Let us never forget that love, no matter how unlikely, can transform even the loneliest heart. There were tears, but there was laughter too, as stories and memories filled the dusk air. As the sky darkened, Spirit stood quietly at the oak, his head raised as if listening for a distant howl. For a moment, those gathered thought they heard one. A soft, almost musical note on the wind, neither horse nor wolf, but something in between. Sierra placed her hand on Spirit's neck and smiled, feeling Shadow's spirit woven through the twilight. In the months and years to come, the legend only grew. Spirit remained a symbol for the sanctuary, his life a living reminder that the wild, when left to its own mysterious wisdom, could produce the most unexpected miracles. Children wrote essays about him, scientists cited the story in studies, and families made pilgrimages to the oak tree, where kindness and courage had changed the course of 2 lives, and perhaps many more. But for Spirit, the greatest legacy was quiet and personal. In every sunrise, every new friendship, every moment of courage, he felt the presence of the wolf who had loved him as his own. In the wind that rustled the leaves, In the hush of twilight, in the peace that settled over Whispering Pines, Spirit carried forward what Shadow had given him: hope, strength, and the unbreakable bond of chosen family. And so, under the watchful eyes of both people in the wild, Spirit ran, free, strong, his heart forever marked by the wolf who taught him what it meant to belong.